Okay, why don't we get started? Thanks everybody for joining. My name's John Cameron. I'll be sort of leading the show today as we share Wholesum and give you a quick introduction to how Wholesum works, dive into some of the dietary restriction functions, and work through all of the sort of advanced features and get chatting from there. I will be joined potentially by my partner Grace, who is at the moment putting our little one down for a nap. And if she's successful in that, she'll come on to help sort of facilitate questions. Before we get started, I wanted to share that this is being recorded, so I can send out a copy of this afterwards that you can circulate with your team if you need to, or revisit any of the topics that we cover. And I'll leave a little bit of space here in the middle for questions once we get through some of the basics, and then we should have plenty of time at the end for questions or to dive into any of the nuances of the tool if you'd like. And so without further ado, I'll kick things off with a quick introduction. It looks like Grace was able to join us, so she just jumped on and she can help facilitate any questions that come on. If you want me to slow down or speed up, you can add them to the chat, or if you want clarifications on anything, you can add them to the chat tool there. So yeah, without further ado, I'm John Cameron, the co-founder of Wholesum. We have been at it for about 7 years, getting Wholesum started, and I've been excited to see that we've got a pretty diverse group of folks joining. We've got about 15 folks on the call live, but we had 75 join to register to get the recording afterwards as well, which is great to see. And it's a mix of folks from a number of industries. While I'm chatting, if you feel compelled, feel free to type into the chat sort of the organization that you're coming from, the region that you're zooming in from, and any specific needs you're looking for from Wholesum. But we have a mix of current customers who are looking to kind of refresh their skill set with Wholesum, some prospective folks that are from the outfitter world, the summer camp world, university outdoor programs, and a variety of other places who are all looking to considering using Wholesum for food planning. So it's great to see all of y'all joining us. I wanted to give a quick introduction to us, both as the people as well as the organization first, and then we'll kind of dive into the tool, do some demos and whatnot. My hope is that this is kind of a mix of things, that it's partially an introduction to the tool for those of you that are new to Wholesum, as well as a sort of introductory training or refresher training on some of the features, tricks, tips on how to use Wholesum to plan food for your groups. So as I mentioned, I'm John Cameron, and my partner Grace is on the call as well. And we started Wholesum about 7 years ago. I had been working for probably the better part of 15 or 20 years in sort of the outdoor world in general, and where the outdoor and nonprofit world meets, sort of the technology space is where I've spent most of my career. And we started down this path of trying to solve this problem that's super pervasive in the industry, which is just feeding groups of people is incredibly challenging, and it gets more challenging by the year as we get dietary restrictions and preferences changing over time, varying group sizes, generating shopping lists and accurate recipes and whatnot can be a real challenge. And I started down this path using what's probably familiar to many of you, of using sort of Excel and Excel-based tools to try to manage this as best as we could. And it worked pretty well for a time, but there were some real limitations on what we could do. So Grace and I, and Grace simultaneously was working in sort of childhood nutrition and feeding groups of people in a different direction. And so 7 years ago, we kind of put our heads together and started down the path of building this tool that's gotten incrementally better and stronger over the years. So that's kind of our story. We're based in Missoula, Montana. It's a small team of just the two of us and some developers that we work with on contract. So if you ever have questions or follow-up calls needed and you reach out, it will be one of the two of us that is there to support you. So yeah, thank you for joining, and thanks for considering Wholesum. I wanted to dive into the tool, and before I do that, I just wanted to mention like the primary reason this exists, what we see from our users, and the intention of why we built it is really to save time for you and your team who are organizing groups so that it's not this daunting task to try to get the shopping list together or the food planning together, to reduce food waste. I've seen this personally in the outdoor industry in particular. When you don't have a good system in place, what you end up doing is purchasing too much food typically. And at the end of a group or at the end of a trip, what you end up with is a lot of leftover food or wasted food in the process. So the hope is we can reduce on that, reduce the amount of that, which both is good for the world and also good for the pocketbook, and hopefully ends up covering any expenses that would go into Wholesum. And you end up saving time and saving money in the process. I also have noticed, and I've seen this across many of our users, is that it's a way to sort of lock in institutional knowledge. So that was another goal that we had in starting this, which was really to, in the sort of seasonal world of outdoor education, outfitting, summer camps, bed and breakfast, those sorts of things, we get a lot of staff turnover, and the folks that are cooking the meals, making the shopping list might move on from that position, and without locking in that institutional knowledge, you kind of lose the ability to keep that expertise in-house. So those are some of the goals that I want to walk away with from today. A quick overview of what we'll do today.
Hey, John, I'm just going to jump in here super quickly. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It looks like Q&A is operational, but the chat function might be disabled. And that might be part of just the webinar setup. But if you have a chance to change that setting, great. Otherwise, if anyone wants to just pop things into Q&A, if chat isn't working for you, feel free.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Grace. Sorry, I didn't turn that on before, and I don't want to waste y'all's time trying to figure out how to do it. So I'll keep moving, and feel free to pop a question or comment into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to respond from there. Thanks, Grace. Quickly, for what I'm hoping to cover today, and we'll run through this and hopefully have some time left over at the end for question, is some tools to find recipes to use in Wholesum to start with, and then we'll do a quick pass through the basics of Wholesum, creating recipes, managing your ingredients, and creating menus and shopping lists. And then I did want to call out a section of this that just focuses on dietary restrictions. I know that's one of the main pain points that folks are experiencing when planning food for groups, and so there's a few tools that are in place that we can try to use to manage that. And then I'll do a quick pass at the end through some of the more advanced features of Wholesum, where we can kind of turn on all the bells and whistles and make the tool a little bit more powerful as we need to. And then I'll cover some of the pricing options as well at the end. So without further ado, let me share my screen and we will go from there. So we'll do some recipes and a quick demo. So hopefully you all are able to see my screen at this point, and I have logged into Wholesum to give kind of the rundown. Before I start using the tool, I just wanted to share a great resource that's out there. Even if you decide Wholesum isn't the right fit for you, there's a great resource that's available from the footer of any page on the website that is recipe collections, and this is available without any subscription. You can access this at any time. And what this is some of our current users have been kind enough to share the list of recipes that they are using in the field. And so if you are just sort of in a place where you're trying to brainstorm good options that are out there, this is a great place to look. It integrates with Wholesum, so you can borrow these recipes and pull them into your own system if you'd like. But even if you're not using Wholesum and you're looking for a Dutch oven recipe, you can find a variety of options that are out there just by searching for them from our existing users. So that is sort of the first piece that I wanted to share with you before we get too far into the tool itself. To demo the tool itself for Wholesum, I know some of you are already familiar with it, and so I'll try to make the basics of this fairly quick. And it should be a pretty quick process to get your handle on sort of the basic moving parts of Wholesum. What we're looking at right now is the dashboard. So this is what you'll see when you log in. And I want to call your attention mostly to this top row. So this is where you'll spend most of your time. And it's designed to work in 3 steps. So there's your recipes, your ingredients, and your meal plans. And what that means essentially is that you'll start by building out your recipes. You can enter the ones that you are already using, that you already have. You can pull in recipes from outside sources by entering them manually, or you can borrow from that list of recipe collections that I just demoed. And as you do that, which I'll show you in a second, it will automatically create this very long list of ingredients that you use. So these are the ingredients that are used in all of your recipes. And this is a space where you can spend sort of as much or as little time as you want. You can define the store where you purchase those ingredients, how much does it cost, any notes that you want for the people doing the purchasing and whatnot. And both of these are upfront steps, so you'll take a little bit of time to sort of get your system dialed in to meet your needs and your recipes. And then the remainder of your time will mostly be spent in this meal plan section. So this is where this is where the rubber meets the road, and you start saying, here's my group, I've got 15 people, and 3 of them are allergic to gluten, and 2 of them don't do pork, and we're going to eat these meals, and it'll spit out the shopping list and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the process that we'll run through. And I'll give you.
And just to reiterate, sorry to interrupt, John.
No worries.
There's like with anything that's using this wealth of information, there's that little bit of upfront setup that you were talking about, where the power is in giving you the ability to use recipes that you're already happy with, and or are looking for a good match with from within the collection that we are able to share. But once that's done, and I know you kind of said this, but I just like to reiterate it. Once it's done up front, you're, kind of getting familiar with the application and getting it all set up to your liking. That's just done. Unless you want to, add recipes as you go, which of course, certainly people do. When, down the road, a week later, or 2 months later into the season, all of that math that's happening, all of the shopping lists, all the packing lists, that's all happening in that meal plans area. So that's really just kind of scaling up or down or making little tweaks. So just to reiterate, there's that little bit of upfront work to get your specific, powerful, delicious recipes in there. And then ongoing from that point forward, whenever you have a group, the vast majority of that time is just kind of making sure the numbers of people, dietary restrictions, and that power in the meal plans makes things go super quickly and smoothly from there on out.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Grace. And you can always jump into the recipes again to refine them, so it can be sort of iterative and improving over time. But yeah, as Grace said, most of your time after that setup will be here in the meal plans. So let me give a quick demo of each of these steps, and we'll pause to see if there are any questions before I go in deeper. So let's start with recipes. So this is my sort of fake dummy account that has a bunch of recipes loaded in here. When you start, this will be blank. And so you'll have an opportunity to start either pulling it in from those recipe collections or creating a new recipe. I'm going to start by just creating a new recipe. I often use the bagels and cream cheese example because it's just a simple 2-ingredient recipe. So I'm going to name the recipe. I'm going to set a sort of serving size for this recipe like you would often see on a standard recipe. This will be scaled up and scaled down later. So if you think in per person quantities, you can certainly start and build the recipe for 1 person. If you have a group of 100 people as your standard group size, you can build your standard recipe for 100. It doesn't particularly matter because it will scale up and scale down later. I'm going to put it in for 10 people just as an example, and I'm going to say 10 whole bagels. So you'll see we've got some options for what kind of unit we're using here. And I am going to start typing bagel, and you'll see as I type this, it's looking for ingredients that are already in other recipes of yours so that we can match to that. I don't have bagels yet, so I'm going to add that there. And then I'm going to add one, we'll say, package of cream cheese. And again, yeah, it's querying to see if I have cream cheese already, and I don't, so I'm going to add it. Great. So this is essentially my recipe. I can come back and add in details here on the dietary restrictions that are present in this group. I can say this is a breakfast one. I can do some custom tags to say this is a quick one and it's easy, so that we can filter recipes later on however you want to tag them here. And then I can also add some instructions if it's a more complex recipe where you want your guides or your cooks to have some more guidance on how to prepare this. You can do that. So I'm going to save that, and then let me actually jump right back in there quickly. There's one step I wanted to share proactively before we talk too much about dietary restrictions, just to highlight this. There's this substitute column, and this is a place where I can start to set up my rules for dietary restrictions, and you'll see how this factors in a minute. But I'm going to say for bagels, let's set up a rule that if somebody doesn't do wheat or gluten, I am going to do 10 whole gluten-free bagels. And we can do, for cream cheese, I will say if somebody doesn't do dairy, we will do one package of vegan cream cheese. And these, I'm designing this as if I'm substituting it for the whole group, but as you'll see in a minute, it will substitute it just for those individuals that need it. So this is a really powerful tool that a lot of Wholesum's current users are leaning on. So I will save that. So that's basically it in terms of the recipes. And then if need be, you can borrow them from other organizations as well. And it will walk you through a process to sort of reconcile the ingredient naming so that it's a nice, clean list of ingredients. Let me jump to ingredients here. And this is a pretty quick pass. This is a space you can spend as much or as little time as you want. But as you can see here, it's a place to change the name of the ingredient. If you want to, call it something other than what you first decided, you can add some notes for the purchaser or the packer to make sure that it's clear, what brand we want to purchase, or what size package you're purchasing, or those sorts of things. We can define the store where we purchase it and the department where it's found. And the goal here is that the shopping list in the end will be sorted by the store and sorted by the department second, so that it's a nice, easy, and clean list to follow when it's time to go shopping. And you can also put in some cost estimates. So I could say I buy bagels by the dozen and it's $3.25. And this can roll up into your shopping list, so you have some estimates for what that shopping list should cost, and you can also get estimates on the recipe for the cost per serving. So that's another tool that some folks choose to use. And that's basically the ingredients page. One thing I breeze past here is you can jump into any of these and see, for example, bell peppers, you can see which recipes they're being served in. If I come into any of these, you can get a sense of where they're found so that you can identify those as well. So that's it. That's sort of the upfront setup work that Grace is mentioning. And then this is the fun part when we actually build our meal plans. So this is my list of meal plans. On the left, you'll see some folders that I made where I can sort things and put them into their appropriate folder. Or I can look back at past meal plans and copy them using this little copy button. Or what I'll do in this case is start a new meal plan. And I'm going to name this group. We'll say webinar demo. This is where we can define the number of individuals in the group. You can do that by appetite size if you want to. If you've got some, young kids here or some teenagers here, you can increase this and decrease this to just bump up the serving size or down. Space to add any description for the group. So this is a place that's often used to capture the specific needs of that group. So to say, Joey is allergic to peanuts and Susan doesn't eat fish, or whatever the description is that you want to capture here. And then this is the dietary restriction section. So this is a place where I can say, of the 20 people, how many of them don't do gluten? How many of them don't do pork? And if we've defined those substitute rules, it's going to automatically adjust the quantities for us, so that in the case in that recipe we just made, it would, in this case, bring more gluten-free bagels and fewer standard bagels. So that's the example that we can throw in there as well. I'll throw a few dairy ones on here as well. So this is where we can define those. And then this section is where we actually make the meal plan. So if I said this is a 3-day group, we've got 20 people coming, and on the left here are my recipes. So these are all the recipes I've created in that first step. We can filter these down and drag them over. So I'll put a few in here. We can filter them down to say, let's just look at the breakfast options. And I can add multiple ones if I need to. We can, look for those quick ones. If I use some custom tags to find those, we can filter out specific allergens. And here you'll see it's flagging some potential conflicts. So this won't stop you from using it, but it will sort of give you a sense of what potential conflicts you have. So let me just throw a few more on here just to make a more robust meal plan. And I'm going to throw this on. It'll be kind of a funny meal plan, but this is what we've got planned for the 3 days now. And the last step here is one where it's basically saying, here are all the meals you just added to your meal plan. And we're assuming that everybody in the group wants to eat everything. So if that's not true because somebody's joining the group late, or somebody's leaving early, or maybe you're serving 2 different options and half of the group is eating one thing and the other half is eating another thing, this is a place where you can then scale back and say, okay, only 11 are doing that and only 15 are doing it for this, so that you're not cooking serving sizes of 20 for every single meal if that's not what you're looking for. So with that, I'm going to save it, and we have our first meal plan created. So this is that final output. There's a few ways to look at this. You can look at it on the screen here. You can download a spreadsheet, a PDF, or there's also a smartphone app for iPhones and Androids to help with shopping, to view the final output list. I usually move to the PDF because it kind of has everything that we're looking for. So what we'll see here is summary of the group. We'll see a full shopping list sorted by store, along with all of the ingredients that we need to purchase. You'll also see the total quantities that are needed for each meal in parentheses here. If you added any notes in the ingredient section, it'll carry through to there, and we can get our full list there.
So this is a summary of the combined total for that ingredient, and then also showing you there in that kind of second column about what meals those ingredients are for. So this is all of the milk you need for this group.
Yep, exactly.
And again, it was just in this final quick step where John was dragging and dropping those meals he decided this group would like, and deciding or indicating what sort of dietary restrictions might be the case. This is the part that would be a quick few clicks for each time you have a new group, and that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. After the shopping list, we have the actual meal plan. So this is one that you can print out or send out with a group that you have. It'll show the number of people eating each meal if you've pulled those back. And then the final piece here is the actual recipe details. So in this case, here's the bagels and cream cheese recipe that we made in that first step. You can see it's got some gluten-free substitutes because we have 5 gluten-free individuals there. We've got our cream cheese substitute for those that don't do dairy. In this case, with the lasagna here, we added some instructions that are coming through. and these ingredients are scaled up to meet the specific size of the individual served for that meal. So this is the helpful tool to actually get your cooks or your guides the details that they need on how to prepare the meal. Yeah, so that's the meal plan output. The spreadsheet output, I'm happy to share if anybody wants to see it as well. It's basically an Excel version of this shopping list, along with tabs for each day, so that you can see which ingredients are needed on day 1, which ingredients are needed on day 2, and whatnot. So that is basically the overview of Wholesum. We have designed it in a way, because it's been this sort of incremental approach over the last 7 years. This is sort of the foundational elements that I just showed you. And what I'll get into next when we're ready is kind of a list of some of the more advanced features that we can turn on if they're helpful to you, or leave off if they're not helpful. So yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, you might be saying the same thing. I would just say this is a good time to that's a lot of information at once. Kind of let that sink in, let it wash over you, and maybe be a good pause for questions for these kind of foundational steps, these 3 parts. Those first 2 parts being something you do right when you sign up, kind of get it situated the way your company, your organization like it. You can go back and adjust and iterate, but that final step, the meal plans and getting those outputs for each group, being the place where you spend most of your time throughout the season. So would you agree, would this be a good time for any questions about kind
absolutely.
of those basics?
If there's any questions, feel free to add them to the question and answer section on the webinar, and we can answer them live or in writing. And if there aren't any questions, I can keep moving through some of the other features that we haven't talked about yet.
No questions yet, but I will give you a holler if they show up.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the more complex items that we have added in here to deal with the nuances of meal planning. And before I do that, I wanted to highlight some dietary restrictions strategies and talk about the tools that are in there for dietary restrictions. So this is one of the most common pain points that we see with our users, and there are a few tools in there to manage this, some of which I've touched on already, but I thought it would be worth highlighting them. So when I think about this, I usually think of these 3 different strategies to deal with dietary restrictions on a group. So one is like the easiest but least crowd-pleasing strategy, which is sort of the lowest common denominator one. So the example I have here is you've got somebody with a severe peanut allergy. That's often a good case to use the lowest common denominator strategy, and you want to avoid all meals that have any peanut butter or any peanut ingredients whatsoever, and nobody in the group is eating anything with peanuts in it. You could apply the same logic to somebody with gluten. We're just going to do a completely gluten-free group, so we don't have to worry about individuals' specific needs, because we're going to try to meet everyone's needs in this sort of lowest common denominator way. So that's one strategy. Meal substitution is another good strategy that we see a lot. So the example here is maybe we're serving pasta for dinner for the group, and if we've got some gluten-free people in the group, we're just actually going to give them this, we're going to give them fried rice instead, or we're going to give them some other meal that doesn't have any gluten in it. They're not having any pasta at all. They're having a completely separate meal. So that's a common strategy as well. And then the last one is this ingredient substitution process that I already demoed with the bagels, which is basically to say everybody's eating bagels, we're having the same meal, but we're going to substitute some ingredients, and we're going to get a little bit creative here. So if you're gluten-free, we'll have the gluten-free bagels. If you're dairy-free, we'll have the vegan cream cheese and whatnot. This one often ends up becoming sort of a build-your-own style meal where there's a variety of options, and people can sort of self-manage their dietary restrictions. And there are tools in Wholesum to deal with each of these strategies, which I've exposed you to, and I just want to touch on them one more time. So let's start with the common denominator one. That's a great way, if you've flagged all of your meals with the appropriate dietary restrictions, what we can do is just filter out to say, okay, just get rid of anything with tree nuts. And now I've excluded from this recipe list any ingredients that have those in them, and I can safely add these to the meal plan knowing that none of them contain this conflict, and we can move from there. So that's a great way to take that lowest common denominator approach. It doesn't work well if you have a bunch of different dietary restrictions. If you've got a group of 100 people and there's some vegans and some dairy-free and some gluten-free and some allergic to nuts, you're going to very quickly end up with a limited menu that's not going to be very good for the whole group. But in certain cases, it can be really helpful. So that's that strategy. The meal substitution strategy is an interesting one, and we've already touched quickly on the tool to do that, but let's make it more explicit here and say, let's do a spaghetti and meatballs dinner here. And what I'm going to do is actually find a gluten-free meal here. Let's say I'll use the search tool here and say rice. Great, we've got a rice and beans meal here. So I'm going to add that to the same dinner. And then what I'll do is when I scroll down here, I'll use this tool to say, these 5 people are going to do rice and beans and 15 are going to do spaghetti and meatballs. So now we've basically added both of these to the meal plan, but scaled them to the appropriate size of how many people are eating each one. So that's a great strategy there. And then the ingredient substitution we already talked about. So that was going to the recipe and defining those dietary restrictions in the recipe itself by adding a substitute rule for each ingredient here on the right. To say we'll do gluten-free bagels. So those are sort of the 3 strategies. The only other thing I would like to point out is that you can customize the list of dietary restrictions. So I'm going to jump to settings, and this is kind of the place where we can turn on or adjust a lot of the features that I'll share with you in a moment. When it comes to dietary restrictions, we can add, remove, or change this list. It will come loaded with the most common ones that you see here on this list, but you can change them or add to them as you'd like. So those are sort of the main tools with dietary restrictions. If you have questions on that, feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. Otherwise, I'll keep moving through to some of the other features that we've had folks.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I'll just jump in with one question that did come up. It's not particularly related to dietary restrictions, but it does kind of relate to the overview that we were doing. Thomas from Camp for All in Texas was curious if there are inventory capabilities, and I thought that might be a question other people are thinking about, and it might be worth at some point in the next few minutes kind of touching on how that kind of fits into what we do. And he had a follow-up question regarding what the portion sizes are based on. Is it USDA? Is it something else? So inventory capabilities and portion size.
Got it. Great. So let's talk about inventory first. So there's not an out-of-the-box inventory tool that you can use with Wholesum to manage it. What I have seen organizations do to sort of deal with their inventory management needs is one of 2 things. One is to use that ingredients section to use the ingredient notes column to do sort of an ad hoc management of inventory, to document how much is available in the inventory and be sort of go through a systematic process of updating that periodically. So it's pretty it's not the most elegant solution, but it's one that I've seen some organizations use. The other one is to use your Excel spreadsheet export and have an Excel-based inventory management tool that you use to sort of cross-reference what's being purchased in the spreadsheet. But those are 2 options, but in general, there's not an inventory component to Wholesum.
So I would just...
Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, I would just add, I know you kind of mentioned this. We we started out with Wholesum 7 years ago, and along that journey, it has been a very, very interesting process and very powerful process to add to what Wholesum can do every year. Hearing what the needs of all of you, our users and clients, are, working closely with this fantastic team of developers who are on the cutting edge of these web-based products, to really be listening to what's needed and to try to continue to expand the power of what Wholesum can do. And there are certain areas, inventory being one of them, where because each customer, each client uses it so differently, this has been the most straightforward way to meet everyone's needs best at this point in time. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but just to say, that's a great question. And there are certain areas where the inventory isn't quite the focus of what we do, but we're always listening, and we're always trying to increase the power of what Wholesum can do based on how we can best meet the needs of our customers. And that inventory area is one where we're listening.
That question comes
but also
up
there's some good functionalities. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just saying that question comes up periodically, so it's definitely on our minds. It's a good question, Thomas. I wanted to share one other thing that is related to inventory, and it's more about like pre-season purchasing for your inventory. So what we see a lot is, and this is one of the features I wanted to highlight anyway, what we see a lot is organizations that will purchase in bulk a lot of their non-perishable foods, and then they'll purchase for each group specifically their sort of fresh items and the more perishable ones. And one tool that exists to help with the former, so obviously we've talked about the latter, where you can get your list of fresh ingredients and whatnot purchased through that. One tool that exists here that I wanted to highlight is this pull combined lists. So what this will do for us is if we imagine this webinar demo is like a standard group that we know that we're going to have, and throughout the summer we're going to have 10 of these group types where there's 20 people and we're serving this standard menu, and you kind of approximate what is going to be used. What we can do is actually multiply this out and say we're going to have 20 of these groups or whatever for the summer, and it will scale up that menu times 20. And similarly, we can add in, say, I know that we're going to have 2 of these and 5 of these, so that you can get a season-long shopping list and focus in on those non-perishable items and make this the season purchase in those bulk quantities, basically. So that's a good tool for managing inventory in the sense of like pre-purchasing the items that will stay in inventory. And that leads me to one of the I think my favorite features in Wholesum is this export customization. So I'm going to turn that on. And to your point, Grace, this list here has come through questions like what Thomas asked, where we sort of like consistently get some new idea from a client and we'll eventually add it to this list. The hope is that we can keep it sort of simple and streamlined, but then add these optional components as we move forward. So let's talk about this one really fast. I turned that on. I'm going to jump back to that webinar demo. And what you'll notice here is where this used to be a PDF and Excel button, we now have this export meal plan. And this just adds more power to reporting. So we can pull lists for specific stores, for specific departments, for specific dates of the trip, to just get a shopping list as focused in as possible as you want. If you just want to see the shopping list in the calendar and you don't want the recipe details, or if you want to focus just on ingredient tags, you can really get powerful here to just pull the specific list that you want. I see this a lot in shopping, so people will pull it just for one store. I also see this a fair bit with the more tripping organizations where there's like a raft trip or something like that, and they want to get specific inventory lists for what goes into each cooler or each box or whatever for packing purposes. So this can be a really helpful tool. And it will also work on that tool I just showed you here, the combined lists, where we can do the same thing we were just doing, where we're combining groups and multiplying them, but we can do it for specific stores or specific departments to just sort of expand the power of what your shopping list looks like. So that's another great one. Grace, feel free to interrupt me if there are any questions as I keep moving. Otherwise, I want to show a few other items here. I'm not going to go through everything on this list. One thing I will say before I go into that is in every case here, we have pretty clear documentation in the help and support. So in all of these cases, if there's something that I don't go over today, you feel free to reach out to us first and foremost, but you're also welcome to come on here and find, a summary of how the automatic substitution works, or if you're interested in the batch recipes, you can see that we've recorded a video here to cover that with some instructions. So there's a lot of support out there if there's anything that you want to dig in deeper to. Some of these are pretty quick and easy. You can define what columns show up or how the PDF page breaks, how the ingredient list is sorted, that sort of thing. You can define the meal categories that are here or the dietary restrictions as I showed before. Ingredient rounding, I won't spend too much time on this. There is some documentation, but if you may have seen in some of those shopping lists that there's an awkward amount here or something where we've got 6.67 packages. If that is problematic for you, ingredient rounding is a great way to set up rounding rules for each ingredient so that you can get that to 7 or to 5 or whatever makes them, or to 6 or whatever makes the most sense for you. And if this is not problematic, like you can interpret this when you get to the store, then you don't need to worry about that. Packing notes is primarily for those trip-based organizations, and this is a place I won't spend too much time on this unless there are folks in the group that want me to dive in, but it's a place where you can document where each ingredient is to be packed, and then you can pull specific lists of those packing notes so that you can, as I mentioned, have like a cooler for cooler 1, and here's here's what goes in cooler 1, and then here's the list for box 2 and the full list of what needs to be packed into box 2. So if you're doing those more complex trips, that can be a really great one. And then let me just touch quickly on the batch recipes and multiple users, and then we can pause for any questions. Batch recipes, there's a good video that covers this in more detail, but this is for those recipes that scale a little bit differently. So I often use the example of a cake, where you can imagine a cake that is meant to feed 10 people. As you add 11, 12, 14, 18 people, you're not going to make an infinitely larger and larger cake. You'll end up making them in batches. So you've got the ingredient for one cake, and now we need a second cake or whatever, and you can make a second cake based on the size of the group, and it scales in that way that it doubles rather than scaling up incrementally. If anybody wants me to dive into that, I can share more about that, but that's sort of this tool. And then the last one is the multiple users. This is a space where you can, it's not meant to, so one license will do the trick for your organization, but if you have users that you don't want editing your recipes, for example, you just want them creating meal plans, you can sort of set their more restricted permissions. So this is a place to manage that as well. And that basically covers the more advanced features. I'm happy to dig deeper into any of these ones that I breezed past. I'm realizing, Thomas, that I didn't answer your second question about the USDA portion sizes and whatnot. And one of the benefits of using Wholesum is that this is really self-defined. So because the system is not going to come pre-populated with recipes for you, and you get to define that yourself, this is a space where you can define what a portion means to you, and you can adjust that over time to really have the recipe meet the serving size that makes sense to your clients. So if you have a bunch of teenage, football players, you might have a larger definition of a serving than if you are serving a bunch of small kids at a summer camp or something like that. So you can really define that when you come in and build the recipes, as long as your ingredient quantities match your definition of the serving size. That's how we can do it from there. What I have recommended to folks is, if you find yourself always at the end of the group having extra ingredients left over, you can adjust this serving size or the ingredient quantities to, incrementally bring that waste down, and similarly in the other direction. So that's a good place, I think, for me to pause again. If there are any questions, drop them into the chat or into the questions and answers. Otherwise, I will chat briefly about pricing and then leave some contact information for you all to follow up with any questions that you have. Any questions off the top of your list?
None quite yet, but sometimes it takes a moment to consider, type them out. So I'll let you know when they come up at a good stopping point.
No sweat. Okay. Before I do that, let me just talk pricing. So it's available here on the pricing tab. There are monthly and annual options. So monthly is billed each month, annual obviously is billed each year. And if you choose to go monthly, you can pause the subscription and then restart it again at a later time, and all of your recipes and meal plans will still be intact. You'll just lose access to them when the account lapses. And there are different levels here. I went through most of these, but not all of these features, and you can sort of decide where you land. So basic is sort of that most fundamental one that does most of what I demoed in that first part of this, with the exception of the dietary restriction substitutes. A lot of our organizations end up on professional to be able to do the dietary restrictions and have Excel outputs and aggregate multiple plans. And then if you are in a place where you need that more enhanced reporting, you need the batch recipes, ingredient tagging, some of these features, the enterprise is where people land. So that's sort of the pricing options that are out there.
John?
Yeah.
Sorry, while we're waiting for questions to come in, maybe you had something else in mind, but I would suggest maybe going to the user stories section, just to kind of give people a sense of the diversity of kind of sectors that we support, as well as how it's impacted their organizations, reducing food waste, saving thousands of dollars, letting folks focus on their actual programmatic jobs instead of food, if that's not particularly their expertise. We have folks from environmental education, from camps, outdoor programs. So I just want you all to know that we have been, over those last 7 years, been listening to all of those different sectors, and kind of some of that kind of long list of settings that John shared is a response to the variety of needs that differ to some degree between these different settings.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Grace. And we've got, it's been fun to see sort of, as I mentioned at the beginning, Grace and I came at this from sort of the outdoor education and childhood nutrition direction, and it's been fun to expand Wholesum's use to summer camps and outfitters and bed and breakfasts and some caterers, and there's a wide world of folks using Wholesum now, which has been a fun addition. I know we're down to about 10 minutes left. Aside from any questions that you have, that's, I think, the extent of our presentation, but I did want to leave my contact information on here for anything that you want to reach out to. You're welcome to shoot me an email or a phone call. There is a 2-week free trial, and you don't need your credit card or anything to get that started if you haven't already started it yet. And that's available at wholesum.app. And then the last thing I'll say is to just spread the word. If you think that there's an organization that would benefit from Wholesum, please do spread the word. We have enjoyed building it over the last 7 years and have enjoyed seeing it grow to different industries and whatnot, but getting the word out there is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we always face. And we really grow through word of mouth. Once once folks sign up and kind of use it, they tend to refer their friends and colleagues in the industries, and we always appreciate that. So thank you so much. I'll hang out here for a few more minutes as questions trickle in, but otherwise I really appreciate you all coming, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to learn more about Wholesum and to spend the hour with us. Thank you. And if any questions.